I am Katie. I'm a PhD student at the British Antarctic Survey, where I'm supervised by Pierre Dutrieux and Paul Holland. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the work I did for the first chapter of my PhD, which was looking at basal melt and channel evolution on Pine Island Glacier. So, oh no, it did this morning. I can't move my to the next slide. I am going to reshare and we're going to do it not in presentation mode and it'll be fine.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh no. Okay, there we go. It's working.
Okay, awesome.
So thanks. So as I say, I'm going to be talking about Pine Island Glacier. So I'm sure as most of you are aware, Pine Island sits in the Amundsen Sea in West Antarctica, and has been melting, thinning and accelerating pretty much continuously since the 1970s. Um, and to date, it's contributed the most of any Antarctic glacier to global sea level rise. So this is a elevation map of Pine Island. So the ice here is flowing from the top of your screen down to the bottom, where the red deep colours are the highest elevation, down to the light blue and purple colours, which are the lowest elevation. And what I want you to notice about this figure is that the surface of Pine Island ice shelf isn't flat. In fact, it's anything but. And we have these channel features that start somewhere near the grounding line, and some of them stretch all the way down to the calving front, and we have some smaller features that peel off the side. Now, what these features are in the elevation are actually a reflection of the ice shelf base. So if we take a cross section of our ice shelf, it might look something like this, where that surface depression corresponds to a basal channel. And the ice does this because it's floating, and it's this assumption that the ice is in hydrostatic equilibrium that allows us to derive changes about the ice shelf base through changes in its surface. So why might we want to do this, and why, critically, might we want to do this on a channel scale? Well, basal channels concentrate melt within them. And so where channels are present on an ice shelf, we measure the highest melt rates within the channels. However, it's also been shown in models that if channels are present, the ice shelf integrated melt rates are actually lower than what we might expect if we just had a flat ice base. So this might suggest that the presence of channels could increase the stability of an ice shelf by lowering the overall melt rate and lowering the efficiency of heat transfer into the ice. But we also know that the presence of channels corresponds to both basal and surface crevassing of an ice shelf. So where our ice is bending and flexing to that hydrostatic equilibrium, we get these brittle reactions of the ice in both the surface and at the base. Now, these can propagate into rifts and crevasses, which will reduce the stability of an ice shelf. So we have this sort of dichotomy as to whether channels, do they increase or decrease the stability of an ice shelf? What's the overall impact of these channels? And at present, we don't really have a fantastic understanding of that, and that's largely through limitations in previous observations, which have meant that we have this trade-off between spatial and temporal resolution. And as these channels are only sort of a few kilometers in width, we have no current time series of melt rates on a channel scale. So what I first set out to do was to see if we could do that. Can we use satellite data to create a time series of melt rates on this channel scale? And if we can, what can we learn about the dynamics of melt rates on a channel and how might that change in time? So to do that, I've been using Cryosat-2. Cryosat-2 is an ESA satellite that was launched in 2010. It uses a radar altimeter, and I've been using the swath processed data from its SAR interferometric mode, and that processing was happened by Noel Germelin up in Edinburgh. So once I take this Cryosat-2 elevation data, we can create these digital elevation maps, models, which we're able to create at a 250-meter spatial resolution every month. Um, Here I've shown an example from every year, but yeah, they do exist for every month. Um, and so once we've created these to get from our elevation maps to melt rates, we do a fairly simple calculation. We convert our elevation to thickness by, again, assuming this hydrostatic equilibrium. We we're doing this in a Lagrangian framework. So we calculate the thickness change of a single bit of ice, accounting for its advection over a year. We then remove any change in thickness that might have occurred from surface accumulation. And we do this using modeled surface mass balance data. We then remove any thickness change that might have occurred due to ice divergence or convergence. And what we're left with are changes that are a result of basal melt rates. So when we do that, we get monthly melt maps, again at a 250-meter spatial resolution over our entire ice shelf. And so now that we have this time series, we can see or start to think about whether we detect a channelized signal within them. Which might be hard to tell here. So to do that, we are going to focus on this single transect between capital A and capital A prime, which is near the grounding line, where we're observing highest melt rates on our ice shelf. And so this transect A prime is shown here in elevation anomaly and melt anomaly, where A is at the bottom of these plots and A prime is at the top, and we're moving along in time. So the top panel is elevation anomaly, where blue, is negative elevation anomaly. So where we're in that surface depression, which corresponds to our basal channel. And the bottom panel is melt anomaly, where purple is more melt and green is less. So what we can see from the top panel is, firstly, we have this very persistent channel at the top of our transect that is really consistent in time, and then some smaller channels that sort of maybe less persistent during this time period. And we can see at the bottom a very strong channelized signal, particularly in that main channel at the top, and perhaps a channelized signal below. It's somewhat hard to tell here, but if we average these in time, that relationship becomes much clearer. And so this bottom right panel, where we have elevation in yellowy orange and melt in purple, we can see a really clear anti-correlation between where we have a channel and where we have positive melt rates. And that occurs across sort of the three channels that we see in this transect. And those eagle-eyed among you will notice that the positive melt rate doesn't sit directly in the center of the channel. In fact, it leans towards the top of this page or towards the west of the ice shelf, which is to the left of the buoyant plume in the channel, which is as the plume is being affected by the Coriolis force. So that's near the grounding line. If we then move further downstream and consider this transect between B and B prime, where we're further downstream, melt rates are generally lower. Do we see a similar pattern, or is it slightly different? And what you can see here is quite a change, actually. So in this elevation anomaly plot, we're seeing a much less persistent geometry. We see big changes occurring. And in the melt anomaly plot at the bottom, firstly, the melt anomalies are much smaller than previous, as we would expect, because we're further downstream. But definitely any channelized signal is much harder to see. And in fact, it's starting to look like we see a negative melt anomaly in this channel. And this is where it becomes this averaging in time becomes critical, because we see in this channel that starts to persist after 2015, 2016, a negative melt anomaly, which is quite different to what we saw earlier. So these two transects really highlight quite a regime shift between near the grounding line and downstream in terms of channelized melting. And we might want to understand how we get from one to the other, and I guess how this distribution of melting within a channel sort of changes across the channel. And so to do that, we're going to focus on this main channel at the top of the transect, which is this guy here, and the one that starts to appear later on, further downstream. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this channel and we're going to split it into four sections. So we have our lower east, our upper west, and lower west. And we're going to calculate the melt within each of those sections, and have a look at how that changes as we move downstream away from the grounding line. And when we do that, we can see near the grounding line, we have this really strong melting on the western wall of the channel. That's where the Coriolis force is acting on our meltwater plume. And when you sum the east and the west separately here, the melt rates in the western wall are over 50% higher than those on the east. Now, interestingly, as we move downstream away from the grounding line, we see a sharp decline in the melt rates on the western wall of the channel, but less so on this eastern side. In fact, they now, from about 25, 30 kilometers downstream, there's actually higher melt rates on the eastern side of the channel. Now, this could be a number of reasons. That channel wall and that keel might be submerged in warmer water now because it's experienced less melting before. It's also, if it's deeper, it's likely at a lower pressure-dependent freezing point. And it could also be a result of this mode 3 melting that Garrett talked about earlier. Of course, these, from our satellite observations, we can really, yeah, we can't prove any of these theories. To do that, we'd require in situ observations from beneath the ice shelf. So I have finished a little early, but to conclude, we have derived these monthly DMs and melt maps on Pine Island with a 250-meter spatial resolution. We've shown that the melt on the western walls of channels is over 50% higher than on the eastern, and there's this big change in the distribution of melt across the channel as we move downstream. I haven't talked about the final 2 points today, but in the paper that's associated with this work, we also show that a lot of this, the channel distribution, is inherited upstream of the grounding line on Pine Island, as well as a discussion about the effect of channels and pinning points and their effect on the stability of an ice shelf. That's all from me. Thanks for listening.